With 6 games left, the Royals' margin for error is gone. What did we think about the bad homestand, and what do we think is going to happen over the final 6 games? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, the right state can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. This is not the way that I believed would be best to start out the week. I think for a lot of Royals fans, you are not feeling good whatsoever about their playoff chances at this point with their second 7-game losing streak since Vinny Pasquantino went down. But we still have to bring you episodes, and I wasn't able to get one up last night. Was dealing with a lot of connection problems here at my house, and then I had to do Chiefs postgame for 8:10 that evening, so just didn't really get things fixed in time, but shouldn't have any issues for the remainder of the week because this is it. It is now or never for the Royals. They have a 1-game lead on Detroit. They have a 1-game lead on Minnesota. The margin for error is gone, right? Everybody is aware of the fact the Royals really can't lose 3 more games, in my opinion. Now, we'll dive into that in the final segment about what their record needs to be, why it needs to be that way, and how they can achieve that and snap this 7-game losing streak. I did promise a lot of people, at least I think I promised it, when the first 7-game losing streak happened. And I hadn't really panicked too much because the Royals still had a comfortable lead in the playoff race. Then Detroit got hot, unbelievably hot. Probably the most improbable run that we've seen from a team that was in 4th place for the better part of the entire season. But you tip your cap to Detroit, and they still have a damn good chance of making this thing happen because they've got 6 home games left, both against sub-500 teams. And one of those series is against the White Sox. So you can't afford really, and passing Detroit, going any worse than 4-2 probably. If you go 4-2, I still think that's good enough to get you in. But again, I will talk about that in the final segment. It comes down to Minnesota at this point, who's got 3 against Miami, and they have 3 against Baltimore to close out the year. They do have the toughest remaining schedule left of these 2 teams. I guess you could say it's a toss-up between Atlanta and Baltimore. But, maybe you could also make a case the Royals have the toughest remaining schedule because of those 3 games at Atlanta. The only thing going for the Royals at that series is that Atlanta could have their playoff fate decided this week because they play the Mets. They're 2 games back of New York. If they lose that series and they're 3 games back with 3 to go, yes, theoretically, they would still be alive. But if the Mets won any of their games in their final series, they would be going to the postseason and Atlanta wouldn't be. So if you are scoreboard watching, which I know everybody watching this podcast does scoreboard watch, you want to root for the Mets this week. So that means that Atlanta's not playing for anything in the final weekend series, but also the Giants weren't playing for anything. And the Royals scored 1 run all weekend. I don't want to say they're gassed because they're not. They had an off day on Thursday. I don't want to say that they are playing uninspired because obviously that's not true. They have their playoff spot on the line. I don't think it's a level of content. I don't even necessarily think it's pressing. I think you just have a stretch of guys right now that are probably playing their worst baseball of the year. And it's all offensively. The Royals pitched well enough in numerous games on this 7-game losing streak to be a winner at least, in 3 of those. And 3 of those would have been fine. I mean, we go back to last Saturday when they had just taken the series against the Pirates. The Royals had a 98% chance of making the postseason, and then they lose 7 in a row, and you can't do that at this point of the season. And I promise people, going back to that promise I kind of teased and hinted at the beginning part of this show, I said that I wouldn't be panicking and I wouldn't be flustered, I wouldn't be frustrated until the Royals approached a game where a loss could push them out of a playoff spot. We are officially there. Now the game is tomorrow, and Detroit plays tomorrow, and Minnesota plays tomorrow. But that is going to be probably the most high-pressured game the Royals have played in a long time. Because if they lose, and Minnesota wins, and Detroit wins, the Royals are out of a playoff spot. And it would be the first time since the beginning of the second half, right after the All-Star break, that the Royals were out of a postseason spot. They had done a really good job at building a cushion. They had allowed for one downfall, one 7-game losing streak, and that didn't happen. They had 2 of them, which when you think about it, it is pretty remarkable. The Royals had 2 7-game losing streaks, not far apart from each other, and yet here they are still with at least a playoff game lead over 2 teams. You just have to go above and beyond in these final 6 games now to really feel comfortable. They can't clinch in Washington. Actually, they could clinch in Washington. I don't envision it happening, but if, for whatever reason, the Royals swept the Nationals, which, again, it's not completely out of the question. Like we said with the 7-game losing streak the first go-around, the Royals won 4 straight after that. But also, they got an off day after that 7-game losing streak, and they were able to rest up, and they swept the Minnesota Twins, who are crumbling worse than the Royals right now. But for this hypothetical, you have to play your best baseball of the season now. Now, there is no, you can go 500. I think if the Royals go 3-3 in these final 6 games, they're not making it. I would feel pretty strongly if they go 500 in their next 6, they're not making it. I think it's about an 80% chance, 85% chance if they go 4-2, they're going to make it. And if they go 5-1, they're going to be in, right? You make things easier if you just go 6-0, but I'm not going to expect that after they just lost 7 straight and scored 1 run in 3 games against a team that's not headed to the postseason. 2 of those pitchers in the series were rookies and rookies that weren't pitching their best baseball, right? So whatever's going on, you have to flush it immediately because these final 6 games are all that matter. We can reevaluate and break down and just dive into everything about September. If we get to the end of this week, we get to Sunday, and the Royals are not going to be going to October. We can go back and talk about those games. But right now, it's not really in the front of my mind. It happened at this point. This is the next string of games. You can't go into Tuesday night still thinking about, man, if we just would have taken X amount against the Tigers, X amount against the Giants, we're probably not playing for our lives right now. But the reality is you are. And the reality is you can't go in and lose a series to Washington. If you go in there and take 2 of 3, it's not the end of the world because we want to wait and see what happens with the Marlins and Twins and the Tigers and Rays. But if you go in there and take 1 of 2, you likely put yourself in a situation in which you need to sweep Atlanta at the end. And that's just not a favorable spot to be in, whether Atlanta is playing for their lives or they're not playing for their lives. You are playing for your lives. You are a team that has your back up against the wall. Yes, Minnesota does. Detroit probably feels the best of the bunch because they've put themselves in the postseason race after the type of baseball they've been playing. They took 2 of 3 from Baltimore twice in a span of a week. They swept the Royals. There are 2 teams right now that are going to the postseason if the season ended today. So the Tigers, they feel good because they've got 3 home games against the Rays, and they've got 3 home games against the worst team that has ever walked the earth when playing baseball. And They're all at home. Detroit is in the driver's seat right now. The Twins, they do get a home series against the bad Marlins team, but the Twins are playing, in my opinion, worse baseball over the course of 30, 40 games than the Royals are. And I think Minnesota feels a little bit more heat because they're right now not in a playoff spot. The Royals and Tigers are, and the Royals got the tiebreaker over Detroit. But you can't really focus on what's happening with Minnesota and Detroit and put that at the top of the list. The top of the list right now is winning baseball games. If you go out there and take 3 in a row from Washington, you can breathe easier. You can feel good about the fact that Detroit likely is not sweeping Tampa Bay. Maybe they do, right? I'm done playing the hypotheticals. That should happen. This should happen, because you don't know. And Detroit's playing so well, they can beat just about anybody in baseball right now. I would like to say that with the way Minnesota's playing, the Marlins can get at least one. But again, that's me putting Minnesota and Detroit at the top of the list. And you can't forget about Seattle either. But the Royals have to do it now. There is no tomorrow, as this promo going around with the Royals, with today, not tomorrow, that the past is gone, all that type of stuff. You have to win now. There is no more, well, we're getting things turned around, we're going to flush it. You can't go into tomorrow night and lose. You go into tomorrow night and lose. I think even if Detroit and Minnesota lose, I don't think you feel good at all about their chances, even holding a 1-game lead over both. Because you have that losing streak go to 8 games. Well, when is it going to end? When are you going to have your best outing? And you got Cole Reagans on the bump tomorrow. You can't lose that game. You can't lose any more favorable pitching matchups. You can't lose on Tuesday night. You can't lose on Thursday afternoon with Michael Walk out there. You can't lose over the weekend with Seth Lugo pitching one of those games. You just can't anymore. You do not have that margin of error. You do not have that cushion anymore. It is gone. If you lose and those two teams win tomorrow, hell, even if Minnesota wins tomorrow and you don't, they leapfrog you because they've got the head-to-head tiebreaker. You would then have the head-to-head tiebreaker over Detroit, and that would bump Detroit out of a playoff spot. But that's getting too nitty-gritty about it. This team has to win now. It's now or never. You got to play some of your best baseball of the year right now. And whether you believe it's going to happen or not, that's what's stacked up against them. They can't afford any more slip-ups in these final 6 games. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's talk about this offense. What the hell happened, and can they get it going? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to 2 sponsors, and we'll start it off with our title sponsor in Booking.com. Booking.yeah. Explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. With hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your rival city during the postseason. Maybe it's time to taste test your baseball's competition stadium cuisine. Luckily, on Booking.com, you can find the stadium stay that's just right for you. With Booking.com's wide variety of choice across the U.S., you can go incognito to all of your rivals' cities. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. So head over to Booking.com, Booking.yeah. We also want to let you know about our other sponsor today, and that would be FanDuel. Now, with FanDuel, hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, and you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Now, the Royals don't play tonight, but if you're thinking about putting some money down on Monday Night Football, you can do so, over on FanDuel. It's where I go to put some money down. College football is in full swing now. But for me, I'm going to give you some baseball betting advice. And tomorrow, the Royals will be playing the Nationals. They've got the pitching matchups in all 3 of these games, but the offense is struggling, so I'm probably not siding with the offense and taking the over because everybody seems to be struggling right now. But I do always feel confident and the pitchers throwing well in a series like this. With Cole Reagans, I think I'm going to take the over on the strikeout total, but do so over at FanDuel. Well, talking about that offense, they picked one hell of a time to have their worst stretch of the season. And it's very obvious why this offense is struggling. And it's the same reason they struggled when they had their 4-game losing streak, when they got swept for the first time this year, and that was in Arlington. I was at that series. But it's very obvious to see in that losing streak, to see in the Royals losing streak in the first 7-game slide, and it's very easy to see it now why it's happening. This offense goes how Bobby Witt Jr. goes. And yes, he started to heat up a little bit in his last 7 games, but you go over the last 30 games, he's only hitting 263. Now, that's not a bad total. 263, 351, 526. That's, over 800 with the OPS. But it does feel different, doesn't it? It feels different when he's not hitting 380, 390. And that's when we saw this offense at its best. But everybody else is kind of falling in line here. With Bobby struggling in this recent stretch, you look at Salvador Perez. He's hitting 172 in this losing streak. He is 5 for his last 29, 1 RBI. That's a guy with over 100 RBIs on the season. He's driven in 1 in the last 7 games. You get down to somebody like Hunter Renfroe, who's not playing his best baseball right now. He's 1 for his last 21 and 11 for his last 49. He struck out 4 times yesterday. You look at somebody like Michael Garcia, doesn't play every single day, but he's 4 for his last 18 in this 7-game slide. You look at somebody like MJ Melendez, who came off the bench to pinch hit yesterday and struck out on 4 pitches. Well, MJ is 7 for his last 42. That's a 167 batting average. Michael Massey, for a little bit, felt like he was one of the few guys that were hitting. He was hitting in the cleanup spot. Well, Michael Massey is 21 for his last 95. So Massey's not giving you enough. Kyle Isbell, I think, is the only guy that for a little bit was giving you something. He was 11 for 38 in his last 15 games, so hitting near 290. But he's your number 9 hole hitter. Nobody else is hitting well enough right now. Tommy Pham got off to a great start since coming over to Kansas City. But now you look at his numbers, and he's hitting 152 in his last 7 games. He's only sat out in 1 of those games in a losing streak. So nobody is hitting well right now. And it's not the pitching matchups. It's not like they've gotten Blake Snell every single time. They had some favorable matchups against the Tigers. They had them in all 3 games against the Pirates, and they lost 1 of them. They had them in 2 of the 3 games against the San Francisco Giants, and they lost every single one of those games. Now, you look ahead to this upcoming series against Washington, I don't know who you can fall back on other than Bobby Witt Jr. Salvador Perez is slumping probably worse than he has all season long. I mean, it's ugly. He's come up in multiple opportunities in the last 7 losses with a chance to do damage, and he couldn't get it done. Nobody is coming through with the big hit. In the 7-game losing streak, the big hit has avoided them every single time. Nobody, really, since Bobby Witt Jr.'s grand slam, and that was when they still had a lead. They were feeling comfortable. It wasn't like that was to take the lead, to go ahead late in the game. Every single opportunity in which they had a chance to break through, nobody's gotten that hit. And I don't know if you need a team meeting. I don't know if you need to shake up the lineup. I don't know how you shake up the lineup. Who do you move around? Nobody's hitting well. Nobody whatsoever. So you can't really say, well, I tried this guy here. I don't know if you can. Who's hitting well enough to move them up in the lineup, or hitting poorly enough to move them down and replace them with somebody who's doing better? To me, it's just not that simple. Going into this Washington series, and I would say the only thing that makes you feel a little bit better, and maybe this doesn't, make you feel better, they get the first crack in all 6 of these games. And I don't know what it's felt like, but these last 7 losses, all coming at home, of course, the Tigers and Giants jumped out early. they would jump out early in the first inning. The Giants in 2 of their games got on the board first in the top of the first. The Tigers in their game against Cole Reagans. Now, they only got that 1 run off Reagans and then 1 in extra innings, but they jumped on him early. Okay, so that surprised you a little bit. And when you're on the road and you're playing a team that maybe doesn't have the best pitcher out there, it gives you that chance to strike first. Maybe the Royals needed to get away from Kansas City. At this point, folks, I don't really have much for you other than we know why this offense struggles. It's when their star player and the guy that's done a lot of the heavy lifting this year isn't doing much of the heavy lifting. Him and Salvador Perez are struggling at the same time, and they don't have Vinny Pasquantino. So at that point, you're relying on a lot of guys who you can't really rely on to carry the offense. They need a gift. They need a botched play. They need a pitcher to implode and walk the bases loaded and then give up a fastball down the middle for a grand slam. They need something in this Washington series more than anything. And I really do believe it's going to take one game. If that can be on Tuesday night, all the better. If you can break through tomorrow night, it just takes a lot of pressure off you. Not that it would be over. Of course it's not over. Detroit could win. Minnesota could win. You're in the same spot on Wednesday. But to just snap this losing streak, to see you drive in 6 or 7 runs and win comfortably, they need that more than anybody right now. I think they need it more than Minnesota because at least Minnesota has won recently. The Royals haven't. And a lot of these things can be chalked up to the same thing. They aren't hitting. They're not having anything go their way. There were a couple of moments in the Tiger series where Parker Meadows made a great defensive play or somebody on the infield made a great defensive play. Things just aren't going their way right now. And when your offense is struggling, it's not so much as, well, you just need 3 or 4 guys to get hot. Everybody knows that, but I think they need a gift. I think they need a moment where it's bases loaded, 2 outs, and they hit a hard ground ball to short and the throw is airmailed into the stands. They need something like that just to allow them to ease up and breathe easier. But there is no more hiding now. You can't go out there and expect to win games 1-0 or 2-0. You don't have a good enough bullpen to do that. So if it's Tuesday night, they're going to be going up against Mitchell Parker, the 24-year-old. They don't have much of a book on him, and that didn't work well in the Giants series, and he's a lefty. So you're probably going to see that righty-heavy lineup for the Royals. They'll need maybe the best start of the year for Cole Reagans, and then you hope that he can start in a playoff game. But first things first, you got to get there. And the only way you can get there is if this offense gets going now and not later. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, what do the Royals need to do in these final 6 games? And I'm talking more so record-wise. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor in Prize Picks. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And Prize Picks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get the money in as quick as 15 minutes. Prize Picks also invented the flex play, which means that you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. These next 6 games are going to be nerve-wracking, riddled with anxiety. Maybe if you're a Royals fan that's already given up, then they won't be as anxiety-ridden as a lot of us will experience that still have hope this team can turn things around. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about what you do, and it's going to be about what 3 other teams do. Nothing else in baseball matters, right? It is a focus on 4 teams: the Royals, the Tigers, the Twins, and the Mariners. Mariners much less so. I don't think the Mariners are really going to be there by the end of the weekend. They still have to take on Houston. on the road. And that feels like the toughest matchup of any of these four teams, because the Royals get the Nationals, the Tigers get the Rays, and then the Twins get the Marlins. But you go to game number 1 tomorrow night. Cole Reagans will be taking on Mitchell Parker and the Nationals. The story with the Nationals, CJ Abrams, their all-star from this year, he's going to be in the minor leagues. He's not with the team right now because he got punished for staying out till 8 a.m. at a casino, so the Royals aren't going to have to worry about him. And you look at who has experience against Mitchell Parker for the Royals, it's Paul DeYoung and Tommy Pham, and they're both 1 for 2 off of Mitchell Parker. So nobody's really got a lot of experience on either of these pitchers because the Nationals have never seen Cole Reagans. But that's game 1 tomorrow, first pitch at 5:45 p.m. The Rays, who I did say were under 500, they're 500 exactly. So as of yesterday, I believe they were under 500. It'll be Ryan Pepio going up against Tarek Skubal. So Skubal, of course, is going to have the upper hand there. But this Tampa Bay team, I feel like, has played a little bit better of late. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, they've won 4 in a row. So Tampa Bay actually has a chance to finish 3rd in the American League East this year. So they are playing good baseball. But the Tigers do have Tarek Skubal. They'll start the same time as the Royals tomorrow. Then you get to the Twins and Marlins. It'll be Bailey Ober, who's been great for the Twins really in the second half, going up against Ryan Weathers of the Marlins, who's been somewhat good over his last 7 games, though wasn't that great against the Dodgers last time out, but he had just made his first start since coming off the injured list. I think he'd missed about 3 months there. And the Mariners, who have yet to name a starter, will be going up against Framber Valdez and the Houston Astros at 7:10 that night. So those are the 4 teams. Those are the first matchups there. So the Twins and Marlins, I think, is the main focus there. Of course, the Royals and the Nationals is going to be your main focus. But if you're looking for a team to crumble, Minnesota might be the one you need to turn to and not Detroit. Because even if Detroit loses this series against the Rays, which I'm not counting on, they get 3 gimme games at the end of the year. So let's say the Rays take 2 of 3. Well, the Tigers can go 4-2. Now, if you go 4-2, you'll tie them. You'll have the tiebreaker, and you'll feel good about that. But if you go 4-2 and the Tigers go 4-2, that means the Twins have to go 5-1. And do we think the Twins are going to go 5-1 with the way they've been playing, and they still have Baltimore at the end of the season? So that becomes a key mark for me. Me, it's 4-2. You get 4 wins in these next 6. I think that you're in, because that puts pressure not really only on you, but Detroit and Minnesota. Because if Detroit and Minnesota want to leapfrog you, they both have to go 5-1 because of that tiebreaker. If the Twins go 5-1 for whatever reason, that means that the Tigers have to go 5-1 to get into the postseason because of the tiebreaker they would need to leapfrog over Kansas City. So to me, that's the mark for me. If you go 4-2, you're fine. If you go 3-3, well, I mean, it still means that those other teams have to play over 500, but it's a lot more doable than 5-1, it feels like. On Wednesday, and we're going to go into a deeper dive for our preview of the series for the Royals, Alec Marsh should be getting a start here, but they also could throw Michael Lorenz in here, or the two could piggyback each other. It'll be DJ Hurst going for Washington. Big strikeout pitcher from the left side. So back-to-back games, in my opinion, that the Royals will be having a righty-heavy lineup. And also, get this, they're going to get Patrick Corbin on Thursday. Has never been good for Washington ever since the big-time contract. He's 6-13 with a 5.58 ERA this year. And Michael Wacha is going for the Royals. So the perfect scenario is you do sweep them, right? The perfect scenario is that you can go into Washington and sweep them and put a lot of heat on Minnesota and Detroit. But in these other matchups, on Wednesday, you'll get, for Minnesota and Miami, it'll be Edward Cabrera and Simeon Woods Richardson going in that Marlins and Twins series. As for Detroit and Tampa Bay, it'll be, I believe that's Keibert Montero going for Keeter Montero going for Detroit, and then it'll be Zach Littell going for Tampa Bay, who's been pretty good this year. And then in that Mariners series against Houston, it will be, looks like, Yusei Kikuchi, who's been fantastic lately. The Mariners have yet to name a starter as well, but they're probably going to be putting all their chips in the table there. And then on Thursday, it'll be Reese Olson going up against the TBD for Tampa Bay right now. And then you look at the Twin series, it'll be David Festa going for the Twins up against Valente Belozo, who I believe the Royals saw when he had to make that spot start way back in June, I want to say. He's actually been not that bad this year. So he will be going for Miami in that game. And then lastly, I think that would be it. Yeah, because the Mariners and Astros play tonight. They'll have an off day on Thursday. But the Tigers, Twins, and Royals all off today. They'll be back in action on Tuesday. I think the goal is 4-2. If you get 4 more wins, that's 86 wins. That means that the Twins and the Tigers would have to go 5-1 to close out the year. Much harder for Minnesota to do that than Detroit, but Detroit also has a very good Tampa Bay team that can sneak up on you. So we'll see how it all plays out. First things first, though, you're going to have to get some wins right here and right now. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Tomorrow, we're going to have a preview of the National Series and maybe a little bit more of a look ahead into how this starting rotation and this bullpen can shut down this Nationals lineup. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.